Thank you. Thank you guys so much. In so many ways, as we see here with just the diversity of incredible people, we know that the port is truly the economic engine of our region. And the future of our region rises and falls because of the work you guys do. I was just there a couple of weeks ago. We were just discussing visiting and just watching, every time we visit, just seeing the sheer scale of the work that happens in our port it will take your breath away. And I know some of you guys see it all the time so often that you're used to it, but I can tell you guys it is just amazing. And I do want to recognize all of the port commissioners who are here today and the staff for all the work that you guys do. So thank you so much. The importance of our port means that the decision about who will lead it is in and of itself incredibly significant. And that decision basically welcomed me into office. We were still getting to know the hallways in the building when I was asked to preside over the appointment of the new chairman. And boy, did the county and city make a great decision in Ric Campo. Ric is a true American story. Self-made businessman who started a small business and turned it into a publicly traded company. All the while, maintaining a diverse workforce. I just met an employee of 34 years, a faithful and incredible community surrounding him. A brilliant spirit of service, as you guys know, involvement in the GHP, involvement with the Super Bowl, with the Houston First Corporation. And that savvy and that energy and that fresh perspective has become clear in the year that Ric has been serving as chairman. You have flexed those negotiating skills, Ric, in Washington, in Austin, and it is just so refreshing to see industry and our port working together to push for the deepening and widening of our port, which we know is just the number one issue. But especially beyond that, to have discussions about how we give back to our community, how we coexist with the environment, how we continue to innovate and lead the way so we are the most competitive. And it's been just wonderful to see that progress and to see that unity. We talked just last week when I was here for the state of the county about how our economic state of the county is great, in part because of the port and how you guys contribute to 1.3 million jobs. You guys did that. And you guys have done that together. It is ultimately that unity that will continue to make sure we're the best we can be. Thank you so much, Ric, for advancing that vision boldly. I'm so excited to see what you continue to do. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming Ric Campo, our incredible chairman.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Judge, for that introduction. I really appreciate it. I know you have to leave, and I appreciate you being here to help kick this off. I will tell you, if you didn't go to the State of the County last week, you missed an incredible discussion and with incredible energy and eloquence, talking about why it's important to take care of people, why it's important to reach out to people, why it's important to create partnerships throughout our community to ensure quality of life and make sure that we are focusing on moving forward with equality, with environmental stewardship, and with all the great things that we know we can do. Judge, you're amazing, and you're an inspiration to lots of people, including me, so thank you very much for everything you do. We'll give Judge a great hand. Thanks. So I thought I'd start this discussion with just a little story talking about sort of my connection and my family's connection to the maritime business or maritime industry. So I wouldn't be standing in front of you today without the cargo ship Ascot. Okay, you might think, what? Cargo ship Ascot. So the cargo ship Ascot brought my family, which started out in Spain. In the early 1900s, the Spanish economy, like the European economy, was really bad, and my great-grandfather didn't have a job. He had to take care of his family, 7 family members with my grandmother, and they had another one when they got to America. And he went to a barber shop, and barbershops were where the community kind of talked, right? That's where people hung out, and they had lots of communications there. And somebody told him that there was a company that would take the whole family to America if they would pay 50 cents a head, and they had to pass tests and health things and things like that, and then they would take the whole family for 50 cents a person on the ship Ascot to Hawaii to work in the cane fields in Hawaii. So my great-grandfather decided that that was a good idea. It would create value for the family. Lots of Spanish immigrants came to the U.S. that way. It took 52 days when they left in the spring of 1913. And they went around the Horn because the Panama Canal it was being dug at that time, but it hadn't opened. It opened in 1914. So they had to go around the Horn, 52 days. They landed in Hawaii, and they were brought by a ship. That ship then, they worked in Hawaii, got enough money to go to book passage on another cargo ship to Seattle, and then another ship from Seattle took them to San Francisco, and then they settled in sort of the Steinbeck era of Monterey and Cannery Row and that kind of time frame. My grandmother had a second-grade education, and she thrived in America. She was harder working than anyone around her, and she never stopped learning. And when you think about the port and you think about what makes Houston great and our region great, is that we have the same view. We work hard, we play hard, we never stop learning, we focus on creating value for our families and for our community in general, and that's what got me here. So I have a connection to the maritime business in my blood from my grandmother and my family coming to America. I would like to introduce somebody who is here today. He's my father, Ric Campo. You want to... Gotta stand up. Well, you know, it's complicated. He's going to be 90 just after the new year, and he's seen a lot of really cool things in his 90 years. He's seen me graduate from college, the first in my family. My brothers then followed me and graduated as well. He's seen me become the new chair of the Port of Houston, right, which is pretty amazing. And you know, Judge, you said a year, but it's only been 10 months, but it seems like 10 years. And I will tell you that the idea of like drinking from a fire hose or learning from a fire hose, you know, learning about the port. I knew about the port. I really did. I knew that it was one of the third legs of the stool of the economy in Houston. I knew that it was one of the most important parts of our economy. And I sold the Port of Houston to Wall Street as part of my company for years. But I got to tell you, I really didn't. I knew kind of the superficial aspects of it and not the real workings of it. I knew energy was a major player in our economy and medical with the Texas Medical Center as well, right? So when I got into the job, which I was really amazed by, and I got a call from the then county judge. It had not been seated yet, just before Christmas, and we started talking over Christmas holiday, and then ultimately I was selected, and I appreciate that, to become the new chair. So one of the things that I did to start with was I started talking to everybody I could about what the port was about, and I started reading history books about the port. So I'm going to give you a little history lesson. So what I'm going to try to do today is communicate with you about what I learned and how we're going to apply that to our future. Because when you think about the port in the general sense, the port, it's about jobs, it's about quality of life, ultimately. Because when you think about it, we can't have a great quality of life without a job to start with. It's got to be a reasonable job that we can feed our families with. And the port has been creating those jobs forever, and they will continue to create that. When you think about the history, so in 1836, we all know the Allen brothers came to Houston. They came 4 months, by the way, after the Battle of San Jacinto that was fought near the Houston Ship Channel, right? And they settled in downtown Houston at the headwaters of what at the time was the headwaters of Buffalo Bayou. And they put their stake in the ground because they wanted to be able to sell their land on a waterway. So we know that waterways have been important to regions and important to our country forever. In 1870, a really important moment for the Port of Houston, Congress designated Houston as a port city. Now it's important because all federal waterways are controlled by the federal or all waterways in the U.S. are controlled by federal government. So we had to be designated as a port in 1870, and we got the designation. They spent a few federal dollars between 1870 and about 1910, but the big money came after 1910. And what happened that created the opportunity for Houston to become the real port that it is today was in 1900 there was an awful hurricane in Galveston, destroyed the shipping in Galveston. Galveston was actually a larger population based in Houston at that time. Rather than rebuilding, bright idea came that, well, maybe we should move the port 52 miles in and be more protected from hurricanes. So that was important. The second really important thing is right after that, oil was discovered at Spindletop. And then the next 5 years, more oil discoveries in and around our region, and all of a sudden now you have this amazing situation where our port starts really coming to life. In 1910, Jesse Jones and a group of business people, probably the predecessor to the Greater Houston Partnership, they said, we need to make this port wider and deeper. And they calculated the cost was $5.5 million at the time, which is big money. And the federal government didn't have a lot of money in 1910. It wasn't really great. And so getting that kind of money from the federal government was very, very difficult. So what they did is they decided to come up with this great private-public partnership plan. They called it the Houston Plan. And the Houston Plan basically said, we're going to take half the money from business, because we know deepening and widening that port in the early 1900s would create value for everybody, and we probably do well, so let's pony up. So they raised $2,750,000 in one day in downtown Houston, led by Jesse Jones. And then they went to Washington, D.C., got D.C. to approve another $2,750,000. They put it together, and then in the next 4 years, they dredged the channel. It became 25 feet deep, and the rest is semi-history, right? The other thing that was interesting about the 1914 was the same year that the Panama Canal opened. Okay, so the U.S. government, to give you a little factoid here, spent $500 million at the time. $500 million. In those days, that's a big chunk of change, right? So our government decided that Panama Canal was really important for long-term cargo and transit to help America grow over a long period of time, and they funded that. At the same time, they funded $2,750,000 to make our port 25 feet deep, right? The other important thing is that my grandmother had to come around the Horn because she was a year late on the Panama Canal. It would have taken a lot less time if she didn't go around the Horn. And they had some real issues in the bunks and the rats and some other stuff, really kind of cool stuff that was there. So when you think about it, that history that started with really amazing business people that wanted a better life for their families, a better life for their community, was about creating infrastructure projects that ultimately create jobs, and that's what Port Houston is all about. So today, I stand on the shoulders of giants. 10 months into my career as the chairman of the Port Authority, everything that's been done over the last 100 years plus has been amazing, and our future is amazingly bright as well. It's going to be there's a lot of great things happening going forward, and I want to talk about those in a few minutes. First, I would like to recognize our port commissioners. So would you all stand so I know we've done this before, but I'm going to tell you we have 6 commissioners here. We only have one that's missing. So I have Stephen Don Carlos, Dean Corgi, Clyde Fitzgerald, Wendy Montoya Clunan, and where else am I missing somebody? Theldon left. Okay, I knew I had one more. And we don't have a quorum today, which is great. That's why there's separate tables. And this works because we do have open meetings act. We have to make sure that we focus on. When you get down to it, all these big projects, everything that we do when we think about infrastructure or community development or economic development, it all comes down to people. It's about the people who show up every single day to make their world better or to do their job or what have you. Now, I will tell you, 2019 is an interesting year. We had the anniversary of Apollo 11 in the summer, right? And when you think about Apollo 11, it's just amazing. It's a defining moment for our country, defining moment from Houston. Collaboration made the mission a success. People made it possible then, and they're making it possible now. Houston has a can-do spirit. We overcome the impossible. We are innovators, game changers, and we make stuff happen. If you can dream it, you can do it. We have that tagline you might have heard before.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills.
When you think about that speech that President Kennedy made in 1962 at Rice University, he talked about easy versus hard. And to me, the folks that work at the port, and I'm not talking about Port Houston, I'm talking about the broad port, they make what's hard look easy. And that's what it's about. It's about trying to create that value and be innovative and focus on being innovative. The port was the key to NASA's decision to build NASA in Houston. And it was because they needed to ship large parts and rocket parts and what have you through the port. And that was why NASA was put here in the first place, which is pretty cool when you think about how many jobs and how much value creation that NASA has done with Houston. So it's all about collaboration, innovation. You might think, well, what is, how does Apollo 11 and Project 11, that's our new, our next project for deepening and widening. Well, the Apollo mission had 10 sort of leads up, then we had 10 leads up to our Project 11. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. It's all about public-private partnerships, and our partners are the Corps of Engineers, the Coast Guard, and we are going to spend a lot of time talking about that in a second. It's all about a race against economic forces. It's about making sure that we have the infrastructure in place to be able to meet the demand of exports and imports for the future of this region. And it ultimately gets down to quality of life, and quality of life is about jobs. When we think about long term, we have to be able to provide jobs to our people. Now, I think that one of the things that I saw in NASA when we were talking about NASA was a quote, and this quote is from Commander Chris Hadfield from the space station. It says, "The more you know, the less you have to fear." And NASA is all about learning, and the more you learn, the less you fear. You don't worry about that. We're about the same thing at Port Houston. We're about learning, constantly learning, changing, and making sure that we're adapting to the current environment. One of the things that has been interesting to me when I first came came to this role was the sort of usage of the Port of Houston, Port Houston, the greater Port of Houston, and all these concepts, right? And we all kind of use these sort of globally. But let me tell you about exactly what Port Houston does, which is also called the Port Authority, right? Which is the entity that I'm the chairman of and serve with the other 6 commissioners. So we do 2 things. That's it. First thing is we're the non-federal sponsor of the channel. I said earlier that the federal government controls all waterways in America, including rivers and oceans, and they are controlled and run by the Coast Guard. We have Captain Kevin Odit here today. Kevin, would you stand up, wave? Thank you. So we're partners with Captain Odit. And so when people call me and they go, "Oh, there's fog in the channel, what's going to happen?" Well, he's the guy who makes the decision. This is Kevin Odit is the captain of the port, and if there's an issue in the port, safety-wise or weather-wise or anything like that, Captain Odit is the one who controls that. The port supports. We support with our fire and our police and our information, but at the end of the day, the Coast Guard is the boss, and we are their partner, and we work with them very effectively. The next piece of the equation is the Corps of Engineers. The Corps of Engineers, if you need to move a tiny spoonful of sand in a construction project, you have to have a Corps of Engineers permit. Okay, so the Corps of Engineers controls every aspect of dredging or widening or what have you. And so we partner with the Corps of Engineers as well to make sure that when industry needs a wider and deeper channel or some improvements, we can help them get that by partnering with the Corps of Engineers along with the Coast Guard and ultimately to get that done. And that's all the Port Authority or Port Houston does in terms of the non-federal sponsor aspect of it. We also manage the 8 public docks, and 8 public docks doesn't sound like a lot of docks in the port. It's got a great business. Today it's very strong, well managed, and we'll talk about that in a second. But let's talk about the 200 plus private and public docks that are in the channel. And this is really interesting when you start thinking about what's going on in the channel from an energy perspective. So U.S. oil, 10 years ago we had 5 million barrels a day of production. Today we have 12.5 million barrels going to 17 million barrels at some point, depending on price and all that. But we have the capacity to ramp that up. And NLGs, similar growth patterns for all hydrocarbon products. You try to say that. That are being produced here in Texas. Primarily, this growth is coming from the Permian Basin and the Eagle Ford areas, right? So when you think about, we've increased our energy production dramatically, and it's all coming this way from the Eagle Ford and the Permian. It's going through the Gulf overall, but mostly through Houston. When you think about U.S. and developed countries' demand for energy, it's falling because of conservation, higher mileage requirements for cars, just better awareness about energy and usage, more renewables, things like that. So U.S. and domestic and developing countries are falling. So all of a sudden we have this increase in production, and demand is not growing here. So what do you do with the incremental hydrocarbon? You have to export it. It has to go out. And that's great for America. It lowers our trade deficits. It creates value for everyone along the supply chain, keeps lots of jobs going. When you think about hydrocarbon growth, we think exports are going to double by 2025. And that's really important for Houston. If you look today, the Houston Ship Channel exports 40% of the crude in America today. We're about 3 million barrels a day, plus or minus. 50% of LPGs and 80% of ethane. Now, the thing I think is really interesting about this is that we have to move that through the channel. Our energy companies are doing a great job of finding it, sending it to pipeline, refining it, changing the molecules around, and then sending it out. And that creates jobs and value for everybody in Houston, Texas, and around the world when you think about it. The other thing I think is really interesting about it is that it's being exported to developed countries, right? And so when you think about the exports to developing countries, right now they're burning coal, they're burning wood, they're burning probably the highest type of fuel you could burn that creates very, very large CO2 emissions. When you replace those CO2 emissions with the energy that we're exporting today, you lower greenhouse gas emissions by 44%. So when you start in developing countries. So when you start thinking about our energy complex today, it's about improving the world's carbon footprint. When you think about energy transition, going to more cleaner fuels longer term, we're the epicenter of that here. And I think that is really an interesting story that we haven't told, that we need to tell. That this is an important place. The Greater Port of Houston and the energy complex has a lot of story to tell about how we're actually helping lowering greenhouse gases around the world by bringing these exports out. And at the same time, we're lowering our debt or our deficit. It's just an amazing story that we need to keep telling. Let's talk about Port Houston's business. Okay, now I'm on Port Houston, right? Those 8 city docks. And we have 41 million tons of cargo that goes through there, 4.4 tons of steel, 2.7 million containers, 3.8 million tons of liquid bulk cargo, nearly 75,000 cars go through there. And when you think about that, that's a lot of stuff, but what it does is it makes us the #1 U.S. port for petroleum, steel, cargo, foreign waterborne tonnage. And what that means, yes. You heard some of these numbers already. So when you kind of unpack that, that means $802 billion of annual national economic impact, $339 billion just in Texas. And this number I think is really interesting too. 20% of the Texas GDP is created through the Port of Houston, right? So it's not insignificant. That translates to 3.2 million jobs in America and 1.4 million jobs in our region. It's amazing when you think about those numbers. It is significant. We need to pay attention to it, and that's why we're all here today, obviously. 2019, we're going to finish strong at Port Houston. In 2019, we'll be 9% up, and 2020 looks really good, too. We expect revenues, operating revenues, to be $426 million, and by the end of 2020, Port Houston will have reinvested $500 million of cash flow generated from this business into channel and infrastructure projects that drive growth into the future. Another number that I think is really interesting is that if you take the private sector investment that's happened on the Gulf Coast between 2016 and 2020, it's $123 billion. So the port's put in $500 million, which is a lot for the port based on its revenues, but when you think about the companies in this room have invested $123 billion in the last 5 years in the Gulf Coast. Now, if you take all ports outside the Gulf Coast and you add them all up for private investment, it's $10 billion. Now, that's amazing. So that shows that we have a really amazing private-public partnership here in Houston and in the Gulf Coast region. It's all about making sure that that partnership works, that we have each other's backs, that we're focused on making sure that we can keep this miracle going. Our budgeted cash flow for 2020 is $183 million. When you start thinking about that, I mean, it's been growing significantly for the last 50 years, but it's all about people. The people make it happen every day. It's not just the fact that the water's there. We have cranes, or energy companies have, storage tanks and pipelines. It's the people that make the difference fundamentally every single day, and we have to think about those people. The facilities are the equipment, and the people are the assets. That's what makes things work. When you think about NASA and Apollo, the Apollo 11, NASA says it took 400,000 people and 7 years to put 2 astronauts on the moon. We invest in our people. In 2017, we've had at least 50,000 hours of training. We're dedicated to creating the port for our employees, are dedicated to creating jobs, really good jobs, and supporting those jobs over a period of time. I'd like to have we have 700 port employees that work directly for Port Houston. I know we have a few of them here. Would you stand up? I want to thank you personally for everything you do every day. Port Houston employees, thank you. Whoa! All right, thanks. I'm going to spotlight and just take a second to talk about one employee. This is Claudio Sanchez. He's a maintenance employee at Bayport. He's had 31 years of working in and around the port. And when I asked him to be here today, he's here. I'm going to introduce him in a minute. He sent me a little quote, and I'll read it to you. His quote was, "Once Port Houston opened the door for me, I was going to take my opportunity." And you know what? And it's about creating opportunity for everybody in our region and making sure that they have a great job and they have a great future. When I think about Claudio, he came and he started an apprentice program, took 3 years to get through, then he added another year to learn how to weld. Port supported his education. 9 years ago, he moved to the Bayport Terminal to be foreman, and his group maintains 48 RTG cranes, hydraulics, electrical, and all the maintenance for those cranes. He's married for 32 years, has a daughter and 3 sons, of which 2 sons work at Port of Houston, and his father worked at the port as well. We have 3 generations of Sanchez's in our port. So, Claudia, would you stand up and thank you. You know what's interesting about today is that when we invited Claudio to come, he's usually working in maintenance at Bayport, and he's dressed like this, and then he kind of had to dress like me so he would feel comfortable. So people ask me a lot about, why would you wear a shirt like this at this crowd, and at this important event talking about the future of the port and what's going on? And the answer is that I wear this shirt, and I wear the same kind of shirt at Camden whenever I talk to Camden employees, because I want to show my respect and my honor for the people in the field that make it happen every day. So Claudio, thank you so much for what you do every single day. And when you think about the reason people are so important, it is about future job growth and the quality of life, but it's about supply chain. And if we don't have a deeper and wider channel, everything backs up into the Permian Basin, and we have trouble. And you don't want to have trouble. Our exports are being enhanced by petrochemicals, and when you think about resins, they've been increasing dramatically as well. We will continue to drive those exports going forward, and it's absolutely critical to make sure that we continue to do that. When we think about container businesses, the container business is really good. We have doubled our container business in the last 5 years. We will continue to grow that going forward. It's about making sure that we have enough space and enough growth potential to be able to provide products that everyone needs every day. If you think about what's happening to population, our population today is about 7.2 million in the region. It's going to go to 10 million by 2040. Those 3 million additional people, plus or minus, are going to need products. They come in a container. They come to Houston in that way. They also need jobs. That's why we're focusing on making sure that we continue to create those jobs. When we start moving forward into the discussion about the channel, we are really happy about having the pilots. We have the pilots with us today, and where is Mark Mitchum and his group? So how many do we have? Mark, are you the only pilot here? Mike, Greg, stand up, please. Here are our pilots. We also have one of the new pilot commissioners, Roland Garcia. Thank you, Senate. All right, so when you think about the pilots we have a requirement, and this has been from the beginning of the channel. The pilots are the amazing professionals that get on a ship out in the Gulf or at a dock, and they pilot the ship through our channel. And to give you a sense of the channel, our channel is 52 miles long, 520 or 530 feet wide in the Bay Reach part of the channel. And so what has to happen in order to maintain two-way traffic, because two-way traffic is imperative for input or throughput through the channel, they perform a maneuver called the Texas Chicken. Now, when I first heard about that, I was like, well, let's see, I played chicken sometimes as a kid, and does this mean that you're like you go full bore at each other, and then you have to somebody has to blink and you change? Well, pretty much that's what it is. So you have this the ships come together in that 530-foot channel, and they face each other, and then at the right time, the pilots on each ship maneuver around each other, and then they pass. And they do that multiple times a day, oftentimes 60 to 70 transits annually. When you think about that, it's just an absolute amazing maneuver, and I appreciate the pilots and what they do every day. They're what keeps us going, and I know that Mark would agree with this, that a wider channel is a safer channel. So thank you for everything you do. Now let's talk about the channel and our Project 11. So NASA had 10 flights before it got to Apollo 11. We had 10 expansions. So our expansion is to deepen and widen. So we're going to go from 530 to 700 feet in the Bay Reach. And then we're going to do some improvements up in the upper reaches of the channel, depth-wise and also widening as well up there. And the idea behind it is to create a great public-private partnership. If we had to go through the normal, what we call business as usual process with the federal government, which is getting in line for appropriations, the federal government usually would spend somewhere around 65% of the cost, which is about $1 billion, by the way. And then the Port Houston would spend about 35%. So if we did that process, we could have this deeper and widened channel by 2030. Well, when you think about the demand going up and that channel as busy as it is, that's unacceptable for us here. So what we have to do is we have to create a system and a mechanism to get it done quicker. And we think we can through this public-private partnership with partnering with Port, the Corps of Engineers, and industry to do sort of the Houston plan like we did, move some of the dollars away from the federal government and more towards the port and industry so that we can get that done. We think we have a program that can get that done by 2024, which would be a lot faster than 2024 for the Bay Reach, and then the upper reaches after that. But ultimately, the Bay Reach is one of the most important parts of the project. So with that said, it's all about people, it's all about partnerships, it's all about making sure that we trust each other and that we can make this happen all together. I think we can, and I think that it's one of those, maybe a Jesse Jones moment, if you want to call it that, where we are all coming together, and I think it's a really great time to be part of the port when I think about that. So when I'm thinking about what we need to do to move forward to make sure that we're creating value for everyone, it is about public-private partnerships. It's about trusting each other. It's about making sure that we come together as a community. And if you go to sort of one last JFK quote, it was interesting. He has this quote that talks about how the country was built and how we created value as a country, and he says that the country was built by not waiting. Or here, it's up there on the screen for you now, which is this: when you think about this country was conquered by those who move forward. Well, the way I'd like to change that is this port was conquered by those who move forward. They started in the early 1900s, actually even before that in 1870s. And then what they did is they created value each time of the way, along the way. And when you think about NASA today NASA is doing bigger public-private partnerships, and there's more private money moving NASA than there is public money, and we're at the same place today. So the question for you today is, what can you do to drive the port forward? And we as a team need to focus on trusting each other and moving forward to make sure that ultimately this port creates value for everyone in this room and everyone in this region. And we know it's all about people that make it work. Last thing I want to just thank the Greater Houston Partnership for this great luncheon. I also want to thank them for advocacy in approving. Their board approved the deepening and widening. But when we get down to it, it's all about us in this room making sure that we make it happen, and it really is about people making it happen. So thank you very much. I appreciate you giving me the time today. Thanks.